to try to explain how to get cost information from the graph that's on the screen. This is a graph that shows the MC, the ATC, and the ABC. The MC, marginal cost, ATC, average total cost, ABC is average variable cost. Vertical axis measuring the cost in dollars, and the horizontal axis is measuring the quantity per period of time. That's what the T stands for, per time period. So if we wanted to get information from this for a particular quantity, let's say the quantity is 8. Quantity is 8. Quantity is going to be 8. If the first question is, what's the additional cost to make the 8th widget? The additional cost to make the 8th widget. The additional cost is just another way to ask, what's the marginal cost of the 8th widget? How much more does it cost to produce the 8th widget? That's what the marginal cost tells us. And so we would have to go Q equals 8 and up the marginal cost function, and then the coordinate of that number on the vertical axis is the answer, $70, halfway between 60 and 80. So the additional cost to make the 8th widget is $70. That's the same thing as the marginal cost. Second question is, what's the average total cost of 8 widgets? So 8 widgets on the horizontal axis will cost how much? I'm looking for the average total cost, and I have an average total cost function. That's the blue function on the screen. So at Q equals 8, I go up to the average total cost function, that point right there. Now I have to estimate that value of that coordinate. And it looks to me like that point is just a little bit more than $90. No way to get it exactly. I'm going to say it's about $92. Maybe it's 91, maybe it's $93.02, but approximately $92. That's a pretty good estimate for the average total cost. And the next thing you want to try to figure out is what the average variable cost is at Q equals 8, and we have the average variable cost function, that's in red. So Q equals 8, then go up to the average variable cost function, and then estimate the value of that number on the vertical axis, and it looks like halfway between 40 and 60, so I'm going to call that 50. We're doing all of these for quantity equals 8. 70 is the marginal cost. 92 is the average total cost, 50 is the average variable cost. So the next question now is, what is the average fixed cost of making 8 widgets? Now, you can't get this from the graph because there's no AFC function anywhere on the graph. There's an ATC and there's an ABC, but there's no AFC. To figure that out, what the average fixed cost is, you need to know that the average fixed cost plus the average variable cost equals the average total cost. Average fixed cost plus the average variable cost equals the average total cost. And we know that the average variable cost is 50. And we know that the average total cost is 92 about. So what does the average fixed cost have to be? It has to be, remember that when you add it to 50, you get 92. So that makes that 42. About. Can't say exactly. Next, we're going to try to figure out what the total costs are. What is the total cost of making 8 widgets. This we have to figure out indirectly. And we figured out using the formula for the average total cost. The average total cost is the total cost divided by the quantity. And from the graph, we know what the average total cost is. It's 92. So whatever the total cost is, when you divide it by the quantity, 8, you have to get the average that's 92. So what does the total cost have to be? Just applying algebra, multiply both sides by 8, and you solve it and figure out that the total cost has to be 8 times 92. 8 times 92 is 736, I think. So the total cost has to be equal to 8 times 92, and that is 736. So, total cost is 736. Figure that out from the answer to number 2. Now we got to figure out what the total variable cost of 8 widgets is. We're all doing this at Q equals 8 still. So, to figure out what the total variable cost is, I have to use my estimate for the average variable cost. The average variable cost is the total variable cost divided by the quantity, and that means, since I know what the average is, 50, that average has to equal whatever the total variable cost is, divided by the quantity is 8. So what does total variable cost have to be? It has to be the number that when you divide by 8, you get 50. In other words, the total variable cost has to be 8 times 50, which is $400. So the variable costs add up to $400. And you get that by using the formula for the average variable cost. Next, what's the fixed cost of making 8 widgets? Same principle. We know that the average fixed cost is the total fixed cost divided by the quantity, and that means that the average fixed cost is 42. So that has to equal whatever fixed costs are divided by 8. And that means that fixed costs have to be 8 times 42. And that is 336. No fixed cost. $336 is my estimate for fixed costs. These are all estimates. We're not getting these exact. Now, if you look at your answer to the fixed cost, notice that you can get that number a second way. If you were to subtract the variable costs from the total costs, 736 minus 400, that would give you 336. Last question, what's the fixed cost of making 16 widgets? Okay, the hard way to answer this question is to go to Q equals 16. Q equals 16. At Q equals 16, I can use the ATC function to estimate the average total cost. And then I can use the average variable cost function to estimate the average variable cost. I can figure out from that what the average fixed cost is. And then multiply that number times 16 to figure out the total fixed cost. I can do all that work if I want to, or I can recognize that the fixed cost of making something are fixed, and so once we know the fixed cost of making 8 widgets, we know what the fixed cost of making 16 widgets would have to be because it's fixed, it doesn't change. It's got to be 336 because the fixed cost is independent of how much output gets produced. That's how you figure out the numbers that go along with this graph.